Welcome, dear students. I will talk about the general adoption of English during the 14th century. I hope and expect that as you finish with this session, you will be able to understand how English language was generally adopted during the 14th century, what were the reasons, and what was the shape and the form that language took. Well, somewhere from the middle of the Middle English language period, English was spoken everywhere now. How English was spoken everywhere and how we can make that claim? Well, there are certain facts and figures that help us to provide an evidence for that. The first of the testimonies for that is that it was being used by the contemporaries, the contemporary writers, the writers of literature, of poetry, and of prose. They were using it. A lot of polite literature, romances, stories, during these 2 centuries, they were written in English language. Thirdly, because of the impact of the Black Death, because the situation or the positioning of the masses in the social system changed, along with that, the status of English language changed, and because now that the masses were coming into power, English language also came into power. Because of this Black Death, there was a death of 47 monks and abbots in St. Albans in 1349. After the death of all these people, now the replacements that were made, the new monks, the new priests who were appointed, who were given this position, they were all the people who were the speakers of English language and who had very less knowledge of French. There was a shift in the writers. As I already have said, that there was a shift from French to English literature. Now, this shift from French to English literature also gave a justification for the use of English in everyday language. There frequently began a prologue in the works of a lot of writers who would write their works and who would give a prologue saying or giving justifications why they are using English or why are they using the words taken from English language. Here I am going to share with you a text that is taken from north of England from the year 1300. It is really very difficult for us to read Middle English language, so we would not read the text. We would just have a look at the text as we would go through the text, and then I would talk about its translation and the meaning that the writer has conveyed that I would show you in modern English. So this is how the text goes on. This is a long text that in its poetic form gives some message or asserts certain things about the status of English language that I would share with you in the modern English language. So here on the slide, you can see the translation as I read it from here for you. Therefore will I, of my poverty, show something that I have in heart, in English tongue, that all may understand what I will say. For laymen have more need God's word to hear than clerks that look in their mirror and see in books how they shall live. And both clerk and layman can understand English, who were born in England and long have been dwelling therein. But all men certainly cannot understand Latin and French. Therefore, methinks it is alms, that is an act of charity, to work some good thing in English that both learned and lay may know. So, this was the translation that I have shared with you, and I hope you understand that the claims that the writer is making is, A, that French is only known by some people who are related to the court, some people who are related to clergy, to the religious setup, but masses and most of the people, they use English language. English is known by the young and by the old, by the literate and by the illiterate. It is a tongue that is understood by everybody. Here I have another example for you. That is an example from a romance that was Arthur and Marilyn, written in 1325. Just quickly have a look at the text, and I am going to show you it in, broken into parts, talking about the meanings that it talks about. Well, this text had certain special features. The text tells that everybody knows English. The text also says, well, there was a time when gentlemen still used French, and the writer says that though he has seen people using French, but he also has seen a lot of noble people who could not speak French and who knew only English. So this is the claim of the writer of this text. So, in short, what I would say, my dear students, is that English was now understood everywhere. However, it does not mean that the French language had lost its, identity. It was still known. It is not that it was not unknown. It was still in use. However, masses mostly used English. However, French, I would say, still had some currency. I would give you the example of Chaucer's court, where the people in the court spoke English, even if its members commonly wrote and often read in French. So, the casual conversations, the informal conversations would be in English, though the official documentation and the official readings would be in French. Another example or evidence is of the romances that were owned by Richard II in 1385. These romances that were written for him, they were all in French language. Now see the comparison and the contrast. Both the languages, English and French, had their particular purposes. English was being used for the masses, for ordinary use, for everyday life use. French was used more for literary purposes, for specialized purposes, for specialized class. However, all this aristocracy also now spoke English fluently. Robert of Brunne, who wrote his chronicle in 1338, implies that French is chiefly the language of two groups: A, the educated class, and B, the French people. In fact, French was very common at this time in letters and dispatches and local records. So, again, the official documentations, the official letters, even the formal personal letters, they would be written in English, but habitually, people would not speak French. I would like to share the remark of an editor of a chronicle from 1381 who says, "It is the French of a man who is obviously thinking in English." So, the natural process of thinking and writing in French was shifted towards thinking in English because that had become a language of everyday use. And thinking in English, that would lead towards consciously translating and writing it in French. So the efforts of the uplandish men and little use of French in the middle class was also happening. Like in our society, the middle class would strive to learn English, they would strive to use English so that they could be taken as belonging to the upper class. So same was happening here as well. In fact, 14th century is the century of bilingualism, where both the languages, English and French, were going side by side, living side by side. For example, Edward III knew English. Outside the royalty, even the royal family, even the governing class now was learning English. They were using English. And English was the language that was best understood by the royalty, by the nobility, by the aristocratic class, and of course, by the masses.